Hey, okay, so I've been doing some preliminary testing as to setting up the rules for creating unique heads for Urban Terror that can be, added as to uniqueness to a given player model. So what are the rules for as to construction, so to speak? So in this case, step one would be just to simply make any kind of shape form that you want based on the Genesis 3 female form or the male form to create the appropriate head that you would desire to have included as part of the player package. So for example, over here we have these are all just the for the most part G3 as Genesis 3 as well as male as well as Genesis 3 female as to being placeholders. So we're focusing more on the clothing, so to speak. So that's we've kind of got that figured out, nailed down. As well as the arms, we're going to be brought in as a component of the complete character package, as opposed to the original idea that we had that characters can be customized to share different clothing. Which is still an option. It's just well, basically we need a lot more clothing to be able to complete fit to finish clothing to be able to accomplish that. But as an example too as well, testing out full body unification of the player model from 3ds Max into the game engine as a single entity as a possibility too as well. So we kind of got that dialed in. And easy to make decisions, but getting heads in takes a little bit of experimentation to figure out exactly what's going on as far as the amount of, let's say, leeway that we have. What can we do to actually prevent a lot of work, necessarily additional work, and how it needs to be configured as far as outputting from Data Studio. Now, for the most part, as long as I can get it into Data Studio as a Morph target, I can get the work out as to how it's needed. So unfortunately, that's been kind of a little bit of a hitch because it's another part of the learning curve to figure out how to send something from Blade Killer's desktop to my desktop. As a lot of the information is simply saved locally, and the native format just saves the DUF file as based on what is on her system. So if she makes a Tom, Dick, or Harry shape, and it's on her computer, it won't work sending me the DUF file because I don't have the shape in the right directory on my system. So there's obviously a way to be able to cross-share assets, obviously, because you can download a lot of stuff off of Creative Commons anyways. Anyways, I'm kind of going off the beaten path, as I usually do. So let's get on to what the basis of the test are. I got two characters here. This is Monique, which is a character that's been baked into the form. And imported directly into Unreal 4, and this is Ruby, which is a hyper extension or an exaggerated character available in Data Studio that is more like a 1960 pin-up character that has the exaggerated head and the buxom body and the thin hourglass waist and what have you. That you put like she's a waitress at a 1960s diner kind of deal. So, and then of course I have another character here that I'll bring that in just a second, that demonstrates the kind of end result that we might be looking for. So let's actually go ahead and hit play and see what happens. This is pretty atypical when you go off axis or off center as far as facial symmetry goes. You can see Monique definitely has a symmetrical face, so we can certainly use this as a head because, well, I mean, she is a part of the dad's original lineup, so we are licensed to use this shape and do a direct bait export of the shape and make use of the head without any further additional modifications to it. Versus our alien form, which can occur if too much of the facial deformity as to let's say the symmetry of the face is pulled off too far off axis from the joint, because we are using animations that have been made specifically to run on the Genesis 3 framework. So this is what happens is once the animation is applied, it's going to pull the joints into the positions that they are in relationship to the G3 framework. So if we hit stop, pop, back, the deformity, it has no animation applied to it or is running, versus if we hit the play button, now the animation is takes over the frame, whatever has been applied to the geometry, and tries to force it back into the original shape that it was. So you can actually see the face and the chin and the mouth, and the eyes are positional, except other areas that are not being deformed by adjustment points are being held in place, so it really doesn't pull it back in. Now the way to correct that is by layering. So if we have a default shape, let me reset this all. It'll be easier to see this. I gotta figure out where, at what point this all sort of fix itself. Okay, so here's a head, the default Genesis 3 head, imported as raw directly from DAZ Studio, brought into Unreal 4 with the appropriate morph targets. Let's see if we can get enough space here, of the Ruby form and shape as a rule as to what morph targets to export. So if by just changing, okay, so you can see that it does animate properly, at least semi-properly. Now we can change the shape of the head as a target. Some of these are actually activated and some of these aren't. I think this is the one we want. Yeah, okay, this is the one we want. So you can see for the most part the actual morph of the head layered on top of the animation. Let's slow down the camera. Is actually a little bit closer to the shape that we want. Now obviously without textures on it and what have you, we don't get a real good sense of the symmetry, if it's actually correct as to the original character as exported from DAZ Studio. But it is, but we're talking like a really extreme shape. You know, what we're testing here is the extremeness of a shape that we can pull by layering in the appropriate animation. Now this has a number of different benefits as to a direction that we can take. You know, so in this case, for example, if the symmetry is maintained as part of the character shaping and forming process, the results are actually pretty good. You know, the eyes are probably located still within axis of the original Genesis 3. The areas that can be deformed quite easily would be like cheeks and the chin area and the forehead and what have you, to create an African American, of course, a little bit more closer to what would be appropriate as compared to something like this over here, which well, she looks more Indian than she does African American, unless, of course, you know, there was something went wayward as part of the gene pool, so to speak. But this is actually, actually would be, you know, an option. We can bake out the character and be done with it, or we would have to activate the morph target for the appropriate head that we want at runtime. Now the benefit to that is once you start stacking up enough targets within a single head, you can actually drive different shapes at runtime based on a given value given to a target. So for example, if we're talking about this here, if we go 0.5, we're 50% of the shape. You know, or 0.1, let's say. What? 0.2. 0.2. Actually, let's maybe turn off the preview of the animation here so we can actually see what the heck is going on. Clear. Boom. So our Morph target is set to 0.2. And as we set it more, this is also concerning, is how it reshapes the scaling of the head. So that's something to keep an eye on, because something we don't want to occur. But you can see that at 0 setting, there's a 0.1, 0.2, 0.3. Okay, so if we had, that's for Ruby. Now if we had another one here for Sarah, and another one here for whoever, and so on and so on. So if we had a list of, say, 20 different heads available to us, you can actually change the shaping of the head. So at runtime, it actually would represent the appropriate character. Now it can be done in a couple of different ways. We can actually apply that as an animation additive, or we can just set the channel value within the character BP. So once again, we're back to the need for all the characters to be contained within a single character blueprint. So it makes life easier to be on the contents creator side to actually create these shapes as needed without the need for additional type of hard coding that is a nightmare, of course, in URT. So this is kind of interesting. It gives us some options and different ways to go. You know, if we put everything into one head, we have a great deal of flexibility versus the option that if you stay on symmetry with the original Genesis 3, so to speak, you can bake the character down, even in body shapes and what have you, into the final result. Because this is ultimately what the direction that we're heading. We're not, don't be too confused that we've locked down anything as far as head development goes, because what we have to do is has to be done by discovery to figure out what's going on, what's happening. So something like this, I thought this was going to be the result of all our head morphs and what have you. But something that's like this, it requires you to get into the nuts and bolts and actually figure out what the heck is going on. Now, we can actually correct this. This is correctable too as well. All things are correctable. It's just a matter of how much work and effort we want to put into talking heads. Expressions, sure, it's a worthwhile, endeavor. But and I think talking heads adds a back end to it for allowing third party to do machinima stuff. But just so that we're all kind of on the same page here, we're far from locking down any kind of idea of what pathway we should be developing a character players along, because we actually have to do this in a runtime test environment as to how it would be applied to the game. So the first thing, of course, would be to start exporting a character with a ton of heads that I have available without concern as to usability or if we are legally allowed to make use of it, and then kind of build up a test run of different heads for the characters that we already have. Like we needed this. We needed to have a loadout of, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 characters. So it would be adequate for doing testing on seeing how the different heads would have to be set up at runtime. So we got to get a bunch of guys on the server and look at it, get close up and take a look at the eyeballs, making sure that they're not bugging out. Okay, I think that's enough of an update. I figure it was pretty important at this stage of the game. We're starting to move into that area to make sure that we have a process in place. Now, from the side of actually creating the morphs, as long as it fits the Genesis 3, and you can pull the shape on whatever Genesis 3 character in DAZ Studio, then you can go ahead and do anything that you want as far as that development goes. You want to make textures for it, we can pull in a static version, or what I like to call a back row character. So you can see that Monica here is not really intended to be part of the player lineup, but has been pulled actually a little bit more towards offline to indicate that it is to keep our sanity, that she is currently just a test model to try different things out. Okay, enough is enough. Any questions at this stage? Okay, see ya, bye.